No problem.
Hi, I'm Michael Church, a flight instructor with over 50 years experience. Welcome to the Talk Flying Podcast, a show dedicated to the elevation of flight training.
And I'm Ty Frisbee, a captain with Alaska Airlines. In the Talk Flying Podcast, Michael and I will share our experience in the pursuit of aviation excellence.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy this episode.
So, Michael, I had the pleasure of working for you as my first job in aviation. I was your chief aerobatic flight instructor for several years. But I remember one particular conversation that we had that really led to this podcast. And at that time, something had just changed with the ACS, the standards for pilot training, and you were pretty upset about it.
We had been out of touch for several years as you moved on to the airlines, and I was not certain how much you had followed the progress of general aviation. But changes had occurred, and I thought it was important that you knew about them. Mm-hmm. And those changes basically made it possible, if you read the federal aviation regulations carefully, they made it possible for a student pilot to do stall training during initial practice, demonstrate at least one successful recovery from a stall on the private pilot check ride, and thereafter proceed all the way to ATP, never having done another stall. And I thought, Ty's not going to believe this.
Yeah, and I didn't. When I got to Alaska Airlines, the guy that started our upset prevention and recovery training program, he had actually recruited me out of my new hire class because he heard about my background with aerobatics and upset training. Here I am working to build stalls and basic flight skills back in by mandate at the airline level, and you were telling me that at the general aviation level, they were removing stalls.
It was fascinating. It may not be clear to every one of our viewers, but all airline training isn't just something that you guys dream up on your own. It's all done with the approval of and the sign-off by the FAA. So there was no question that one hand knew something and another hand didn't. And it's important to recognize at this point that the disconnect was not limited to stalls and upset recoveries. That's dramatic and it catches people's attention. But in fact, there was a general change in philosophy at the GA, the General Aviation Training level, shifting emphasis from excellence in practice and learning how to fly to avoidance. There's a dragon in that cave. Just stay away from it.
Right.
Don't bother with the fact that some people say that it's a gecko and fun to play with. Just stay away from it. And from that, there are really 4 points of major change that accompany this shifted emphasis in training philosophy. One we've already talked about, minimizing student exposure to stalls. It's perfectly okay that a student remains nervous, uncomfortable, or even perhaps downright scared of stalls, as long as they are able to perform one stall recovery on a private pilot check ride. That is considered to be an adequate experience. Avoidance is going to be the word from that point forward.
And let's be clear, you're talking about what's wrong with the flight training industry.
Other areas in which this shift in philosophical approach to training, however, are fascinating. Solo flight for student pilots has all but been eliminated. The most enjoyable flights that I had as a student pilot were by myself in an airplane. Mm-hmm. Okay, there is nothing like getting rid of the instructor.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's the job of the student. Get rid of the instructor. And that's the job of the instructor when you get right down to it. Have the student get ready to get rid of you. Solo time for students is immensely important. It's how you season. It's how you gain confidence. It's how you become certain that your solutions are workable. And it's been minimized.
Right.
Okay. Major schools no longer permit student solo. They limit the student solo experience exclusively to the solo cross countries. So that was one change. Bank angles of greater than 30 degrees are discouraged. Okay. Well, you haven't learned to fly, I'm sorry to say, if you limit your bank angles to 30 degrees.
That makes me think of the VN diagram or the VG diagram, right? Which is the envelope is what it's known as.
Yeah.
And in a private pilot through, say, even ATP, most pilots, especially if they didn't get a CFI and they didn't do spins, they've really just done this little tiny line along the 1G line. And maybe every once in a while, right around 100 knots, 120 knots, it blips up to 1.3 Gs and then back down again, right?
Right.
And it's amazing because for us as aerobatic pilots, we've colored all over that diagram and
Indeed.
positive and negative Gs. So for us to look at the basic training program and know how much we learned from flying by just getting off that 1G line a little bit here and there, maybe touching that stall line at different points along the curve, made us better pilots.
They're all stressed to 3.8 Gs.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And it is simply not learning to how to fly your airplane if you limit yourself to 1.5. So the other changes is the recommendation that technology in the cockpit is an appropriate substitute for flight skill. What happens today with many of today's current students is they don't learn respect for the airplane because they are too busy depending upon the automation. But automation isn't there to save your life.
Right.
It's there to save your workload. Mm-hmm. It's not an appropriate substitute for flight skill.
When you get to the airlines, the expectation is that if the automation doesn't work, you can still do your job. You're a professional pilot. So to build in the early phases reliance on automation isn't actually preparing you for the job that you're going to have.
One more of the changes that occurred as a consequence of the shift in emphasis is that avoidance is now the recommended approach to minimizing risk. The don't do that's have begun to outnumber the do's. It's a shame to teach flying like that. An activity that gives you the opportunity to experience this remarkable freedom, remarkable independence, remarkable self-reliance. All of those things are built into learning to fly. And if you are dependent upon the machine to fly for you, okay, you might as well be in the back of the airliner with the shade pulled down.
No wonder why we've seen a degradation in just the passion for flying. The things that are really fun are actually maneuvering and looking out the window, navigating by what you see outside versus a GPS, a magenta line. These are the things that are challenging and rewarding as a result. That kind of naturally leads to training for the test.
And that's the last of the changes, training for the test. And there is a very, very unfortunate move. The test is increasingly seen as just a stepping stone to be able to make progress to the next level, as opposed to proof of the fact that you actually earned that certificate. And I'll give you an example. The 45-degree banked 360-degree turns required of the private pilot applicant on that check ride. Nobody after that check ride does 45-degree bank turns. So that what's happened by calling them steep, okay, they've been moved to another category of activity, something that I have to be able to do to pass, not something that I would actually do when I fly. The airplane has so much more to offer you. One of the great rewards of flying is the fact that aviation continues to present you with challenge after challenge after challenge, should you choose to meet them. Why not do 45-degree bank turns in the pattern? Okay, I recommend them. They make you safer. No, you can't do that. And the reason you can't do that is simply because you were told that that's a risk of stall.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's a lie.
That reminds me of another area where I think the flight training industry doesn't really understand what the airlines want, and that's the stabilized approach. So more and more you see students in single-engine airplanes being taught to come in at a 3-degree glide slope on a nice stable approach, fully configured. All of our procedures are predicated by losing one engine. What would you do if you lost one engine before V1? You would reject the takeoff and abort. What would you do if you lost one engine after V1? You would continue the takeoff, maintain a directional control, climb, and follow your procedures to clean up. What would you do if you lost one engine while flying over the Rocky Mountains? You might have a drift down course that you have to fly through mountain passes and so on. So everything we do is predicated on losing one engine. That's airline culture. And to fly a single engine airplane at a 3-degree glide slope, fully configured, full flaps, what would you do if you lost one engine? crash. That's what you would do. That is not airline mentality. That is not airline philosophy. That is not preparing you for the mindset of an airline pilot, where you're constantly thinking, what if I lose an engine? What if I lose an engine? What will I do?
Yeah, there's a fairly significant difference. In a twin-engine 737, and you lose one engine, you have one remaining.
That's right.
In a Cessna 172, you lose one engine, and it's a different game. I remember a comment, I don't know what this emphasis is, that you be able to glide to your airport or to your runway. That's an old-fashioned idea. And I wondered what had changed from the old-fashioned days to now. Are engines more reliable?
Not really.
They most assuredly are not.
Mm-hmm.
Not at the piston level. Jets are, but not piston engines. They haven't changed in 70 years. I understand exactly how this type of mentality and this type of approach to flight training has been created. More and more of the people walking in our doors were interested in career than ever before in the 40 plus years that I operated Sunrise. I recognized that, but also recognized that we need to train them differently and not train for the right seat of a 7.3. But that, I think, is where a great deal of the mentality has shifted. There's an economic pressure to do so. Mm-hmm. If you ask this person, why are you learning to fly? Well, I have a career in mind. I'm uninterested in that answer. And so let's talk about this. When did you decide that learning to fly was something that you were interested in experiencing?
Even though I grew up in Alaska and I was infatuated with airplanes my whole life, I think I really got the bug the day I was playing out in the yard. I was about 10 years old, and I heard an airplane coming kind of from behind me, and I whipped over my head back and to look, and it was a J3 Cub on floats. So bright yellow, exposed cylinders. I could see the ropes sort of trailing in the wind, and that very distinct small Continental engine sound. And it was just a flash that it went by because it was just above the treetops. But I remember just thinking, I have to do that, right? And then the irony is, maybe not the irony, the result of passion, that's where the passion, I think, really began. The result of that passion, it led me through my flying career, and it got me to where I am now. I didn't even plan on being a major airline pilot, but here I am. And that career gave me the means to have a J3 Cub on floats in my backyard. So I think passion gets you where you want to go. In fact, my wife is also an airline captain at Alaska Airlines, which is part of the reason why I have a J3 Cub on floats in my backyard.
Nice.
It helps. But she's also involved in hiring at Alaska. And I don't know exactly what they look for, but I do know, just based on my conversations with her after she comes home from a round of hiring, there's a spark. There's a passion for flying, a real zeal for aviation they look for. And I'm sure that's true at every airline. So
that's fascinating. I had never realized that.
It's interesting. Again, this is a bit of a disconnect from the flight training industry, which is sort of paint by numbers. Here's the ACS, and we're going to train for this check ride. You know, you accomplish all of these tasks, check all the boxes, get 3 or higher on your 141 syllabus grade sheet, and then off you go. You're an airline pilot. Well, that's not exactly what they're looking for. You know, they want somebody that loves this, that they know is going to do a good job, that they're going to be a good steward of the airline, and that really comes from passion. And also, if it's a competitive market like it is now, you have to have something that stands out. Go get a flow plane rating. Go take an aerobatics course.
Go soaring.
Go soaring. That's right. So if you're going to be sitting there just logging another hour or two, might as well do something that makes you stand out, something you enjoy, something that gives you the passion in flying, and something that makes your resume stand out when the hiring begins again.
Every flight instructor should start out a new student by saying, tell me, why are you learning to fly? And if the answer is career, I would try to brush that aside to some degree and say, okay, well, that's possibly in your future. It's a long road and not the easiest in the world, okay? But I'm really interested in knowing, when did you first get the idea that it would be fun if you knew how to fly? And for me, it was very, very late. I was brought up on St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, 1,100 miles away from Miami. And airplanes had almost no interest for me whatsoever, except as a means of getting to that other place. I was sitting around. I had gotten out of college. I had absolutely no goals in life whatsoever. My friend Paige asked me, well, what do you want to do? And we were both young enough that we weren't really worried about money and career. And then he says, I want to jump out of an airplane. And I thought, well, no, I'm not certain that I have any interest
Sounds
in
like a
that
terrible idea.
whatsoever, right? Catch me jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. But the idea grew on me for a couple of weeks. It didn't occur to me at the time, but it eventually came home that I had never put my life at risk. I'd had a very safe upbringing, and life simply didn't have any risk attached to it at all.
Right.
And the idea of jumping out of an airplane just kind of like, well, maybe you ought to try something like that. And the first time I let go, I was entirely, totally by myself. And as far as I was concerned, completely responsible for my own survival. And that was seductive.
Yeah.
It was so liberating to be in charge. And that's aviation. The idea that I am the master of this activity. I'm free.
Yeah.
So that's when it all of a sudden bit.
That kind of brings us back to this de-emphasis of solo flight,
Yes.
right? Why would you want to learn to fly and then never fly by yourself? When it comes to this spark and this passion, solo flying is really the way that you get to express that.
Solo flying might be, just to put a number on it, twice as challenging as having somebody else in the airplane. It doesn't even matter if that somebody else isn't the pilot.
Right.
Having
right.
company somehow diminishes the liberation that's available in aviation.
That's an unfortunate byproduct of this avoidance mentality that you mentioned.
Yes.
Is that you're actually trying to avoid things that are challenging. And things that are challenging are what make you grow and become stronger. For those that don't know, Sunrise was a Part 141 flight school, pretty large. I remember when I worked there, you had 25, 30 airplanes. It was substantial.
Over 30 at some point.
Yeah. And you taught everything from sport pilot to multi-engine ATP. And then you also had a large aerobatic division. So you had quite a depth and breadth of training available to you. I think the only thing that we didn't do was float planes and gliders, really.
Right. We had formation courses.
That's right. That's right. That was a blast.
And I coached an aerobatic team, a competition team,
Yeah.
and flew competition myself. You flew competition.
Yep.
And I'm sorry to say, flew better than I did.
It was funny because Sunrise, the lobby was completely lined with trophies that had been won by your students at Sunrise.
Right.
And that was another thing that set Sunrise apart was you would rent the airplanes to the students solo after they checked out. And not just any airplanes. We're talking the decathlons, which there's a couple places that you can rent a decathlon, which is kind of a primary aerobatic trainer for somebody that's not familiar. But also the Pitts S2B, which is widely regarded as the most difficult certified airplane there is to fly. To land. Yeah, to
Right.
fly. But even to fly. I mean, I would have people that would try to do a loop and end up in an inverted flat spin. It was, it was not the easiest airplane to fly.
It was not.
Right. And then the Extra 300, which was a little easier than the Pitts, but it was a very expensive machine. That's like renting a Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
And you really kind of put your money where your mouth was. I remember your philosophy was, if I believe in my training, I will rent this airplane to this person once they've completed my training.
Right. So one of the things that made me feel confident to do that is that every student at Sunrise did spins prior to solo. And that was built into our syllabus. So it was a mandatory training element. You didn't get to go, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
If you didn't want to do that, I would say, well, let me do everything I possibly can to find out why you don't want to do it and make it fun. Okay.
Yeah.
And if I really can't get there, you'll need to find another school.
Aerobatics may not seem like it is relevant to a lot of the viewers because they're on a different path. They're maybe on a career path or it's just not something that they're interested in.
Right.
But the idea that you compete at something, and that could just be compete with yourself. So you're trying to compete with your last landing. Can I make this landing better than my last landing? And this is constant pursuit for being better. And it also involves how you handle critique. So if you're competing with yourself, always trying to get better, you're going to have a better attitude when it comes to being critiqued. And let's face it, as career pilots, we're being critiqued all the time. I have never had a perfect flight. I've never had a perfect sim session. There's always a debrief. What could we have done better?
Believe it or not, flying is easy. There isn't anything in and of itself special about the fact that this person is a pilot and that person isn't. Flying is easy.
Yeah.
However, flying well is hard. And that's a lifetime pursuit of mine. And then the most important thing that I have to tell everybody viewing this is that flying safely is challenging. In the long run, okay, you have to solve the problem of getting back down safely.
Yeah.
Okay. And the necessity of giving that forethought was slow to arrive for me. But eventually you have to consider the ending before you think about the beginning. So I call landing graceful surrender, right? I don't want to lose catastrophically to gravity.
Right.
What I want to do is have given it enough thought and have enough skill that regardless of the circumstances, wind, runway condition, engine condition, regardless, okay, I can arrange a graceful surrender.
Sunrise really was a special place. And what made it so special wasn't just the fleet and your interest in aerobatics, it was your technique in teaching. I read a quote from Viktor Frankl that I think really sums up your technique. And I'll paraphrase. Viktor Frankl said, there's a space between stimulus and response. And in that space is where you have your power to choose how you will respond. How does that make you feel about your way of teaching?
Well, the first thing that I had to learn, and that took maybe 1,000 hours, was that there aren't good students and bad students.
Yeah.
I finally did tumble to the fact that I wasn't going to be successful if I continued with that mindset. I had to decide that the problem lay with me. Once that was done, then the fact that a student didn't perform well was just a challenge, not a disappointment. Flight instructors can become disappointed in their students because they just aren't learning. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, no, I'm sorry. You just aren't teaching. That's the truth. Okay. I've had very few students who were incapable of learning to fly. And so that makes flight instruction an everlastingly interesting activity because every student is to some degree different.
Right.
Okay. And sometimes the differences are very significant. Okay. It doesn't really make any difference how quickly they progress. What ends up being the measure is how thoroughly did they learn and how safe do I feel soloing them. Mm-hmm. I can't give you really what it is exactly that made Sunrise as successful as it was and why I continued to enjoy teaching for more than 50 years,
right?
Okay, which is unusual. But it had a lot to do with simply recognizing that every challenge, every student posed different challenges. And it was my job to figure out how to be effective.
Yeah.
And it became fun after a while. I wonder what word would work that would get this idea, or what demonstration would work that would get this idea across better than the last one I made. The job of a flight instructor on the ground is to teach just long enough to be able to create a question. If I've taught enough, I should now be able to ask a question. Okay. And it can't be one that's satisfied by a rote answer or memorization, right? I have to be clever enough in the question to have a little challenge built into it, and then listen very, very carefully to the answer and make sure I don't accept a wrong answer. It's very tempting to accept the wrong answer because it moves things along. The example I think of right now is a really easy yes-no. You're teaching VOR use, and you say, in this circumstance, is the CDI, the needle, going to be left or right? And the student says left, and it happens to be the wrong answer. It is so tempting to say, well, no, it would be to the right. You see why? Okay.
Provide the answer.
You just provided the answer.
Yeah.
You can't answer your own questions.
As a former instructor of Sunrise, the first thing you learn is which words are prohibited. So you, as a flight instructor, you wouldn't let us use the words aileron, elevator,
well,
rudder.
as little as possible.
Right. That comes down to, I believe you call it observe and critique.
Every instructor, once you're in the right seat, has this job: observe the student and critique. So the difference comes in that you want to critique silently. It doesn't really make any difference what the activity is. There's going to be an error in pitch, bank, or yaw, or power management. Okay, that's what you observed. Before you can say anything about what the student should do to correct it, ask yourself, how did I know? What did I see that made that error clear to me? And then don't say you needed more rudder or you needed more aileron.
To clarify this, right? Mm-hmm. An instructor's job is to observe and critique. Yes. And that's still true.
Yes, absolutely.
But you say critique silently.
Right.
I see the prop is pulling the nose to the left, and the student doesn't have enough right rudder. And I could simply say more right rudder, or I could say step on the ball or look at the ball. That's observe and critique.
Yes.
Right. But what you're saying is critique silently.
That's a good example, because one of the easiest things to ignore is propeller yaw. Every time the airplane is flying below its design cruising speed, the propeller in all likelihood is going to be pulling the nose to some degree to the left. It depends on how much airplane you have, how much power you have, and so forth. But it's there, and it's very easy to ignore.
The cars don't have it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's easy to fix it like you would with a car and just roll the airplane a little bit to the right. And now that you're banked to the right, okay, there's a turning tendency that you've created, which cancels the propeller's turning tendency to the left. And the next thing you know, the yaw is gone.
And climbing
the
out in
airplane
a
is
slip.
climbing out in a slight slip. Here are the things that you could say. Where is the ball? Do you see the nose moving? Yeah, it's moving to the left, isn't it? There, you just gave the answer. Don't answer your own questions. What you need to do is observe, oh, okay, this student isn't using enough right rudder against the propeller. And what he or she is doing is using bank to fix it, which is the wrong control surface for the wrong solution. So what I want to do is call their attention to that. Here's the right question. Are the wings level?
Okay.
I'm not asking you, is the nose moving? Do you have enough right rudder? Is the ball in the center? I'm asking you this. Are the wings level? And the student looks at the two wingtips and says, no. And I say, go ahead and level the wings. Now, what do you see the nose doing? And then don't answer the question.
Yeah.
Do you see the nose is skidding to the left? Right?
Don't say that.
Don't say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Right? Wait until the student discovers it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in my experience, sometimes they'll just put the wings back to the into
absolutely.
the bank to stop the skid. And then they just go back and forth a few times without providing the answer. But eventually the light bulb goes off.
Right. So that's another piece. You don't use the word aileron. You don't use the word rudder. You don't use the word elevator. You don't talk about the throttle, okay, the control inputs, because you're treating your student like an autopilot. Not a very good one. What you want them to do is you need to get people to discover what you know. And that means that when you teach flying, okay, what you teach is seeing. You don't teach pushing or pulling on the control surfaces, adding or subtracting throttle. What you really do is you teach the student to see the result. What you see, get them to see it. And that, by the way, means getting them to also see what it looks like when it's done wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I can boil it down to this. The student must know, what is this supposed to look like? Where do I need to look to see it? And when do I need to look there? That's the key.
Yeah.
What is it supposed to look like? Where do I need to be looking to make sure I see it? And did I look at the right time?
I think it's so ironic that flying is a visual activity and the medium that we fly in is invisible.
That's a great observation. Yeah.
It makes it challenging.
You have to imagine the relative wind.
Exactly. So visualizing relative wind is a big part of the way you teach.
All of this has to do with why I love to fly. I can sit here and still feel excited about either my own discovery of what didn't I know and what did I just learn, or the students' discoveries.
I believe you call this discovery-based training.
Yeah, and I don't know that it had to have a name.
Yeah.
It's just that it's so much more permanent if the student came up with the answer.
Yes.
Right.
I think human nature and psychology supports the fact that you are more receptive to an idea or an answer to a question.
Totally.
If you came up with the
I
answer.
anticipated it. Right.
Yeah.
If nobody taught me where to look or how to do this or why it is that way, right, then I can come up with my own answer.
Right.
Okay. I'll give you one. Okay. Ground effect. Well, it's obvious what ground effect is. It only happens close to the ground. So obviously there's a cushion of air beneath the wing that holds the airplane up. You have no idea how hard it is to get rid of that particular misperception because it isn't true. Right. But if I came up with that on my own, I'm going to hang on to it.
You've been doing it right the whole time with your flight school throughout your flying career. And I can't help but think that gliders played a big role in that.
Like so many things in life, that was just a matter of sheer luck. I'd been teaching only for 400 or 500 hours. And a gentleman who became a lifelong friend showed up with 2 gliders. And so I went across and said, I'm interested. And that was a blessing. If I had my druthers, I would teach flying in gliders up through solo.
Yeah.
And then add an engine. It would simplify the activity of getting to solo tremendously. It might cut it by as much as 50%.
Yeah.
You don't have the care and feeding of the engine to worry about. You do have a new problem, which is energy management, but that was worth learning no
Right.
matter what. There's 2 instruments on the panel to which you pay attention. And one is altitude. That's obvious because you're in an emergency condition in a glider once you pull the release. You
Yeah.
might as well consider this is an emergency.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other would be airspeed because you had to manage energy efficiently. It teaches you how to fly.
That's a good segue into what we're going to do with this channel. So the first thing that we're going to do is to teach through solo, probably be 10 or 12 episodes of the podcast.
In all likelihood.
Yeah. So we're going to do the ground school, the theory. Gliders are going to play a role in this. I think we'll give a lot of examples with gliders because the prop and the engine instruments and all that kind of stuff
Or distractions.
kind of complicates it. But it'll be a power-based training process, but
Naturally.
gliders will oftentimes come up as examples.
You know, airplanes don't have a pitch down moment because they have an engine up front. Gliders don't. And they're built exactly the same way. So there are times when you can use the glider to simply say, let me eliminate that thought process.
Right, absolutely. It's the purest form of flight, and therefore it should be the foundational thought process. We're also going to spend a little bit more time on the basics, because one of the things that you have identified was that the very, very basic principles oftentimes get glossed over.
Because they're taken for granted.
Taken for granted, exactly. And early on in the training process, people tend to progress very quickly, and then they run into some sort of a plateau. And that's generally speaking because they didn't actually understand the early concepts.
And probably the most important single one of those elements is the air. We just take it for granted. And yet the air and differential pressure, air pressure, right, play such an astoundingly important role in all flight. Whether it's a hot air balloon or a glider or a helicopter, it doesn't make any difference, okay? We play with the air constantly and almost never give it any thought whatsoever. What's the first lesson? 4 forces. It is simply taken for granted. Without an understanding of that, really nothing about the airplane really makes sense.
Right.
Why do engines breathe?
Yeah.
Okay, how do you breathe?
Yeah.
What role does gravity play in this? You're going to have to do all of that before you can think about doing 4 forces.
Your approach was always to challenge the norms or confront dogma whenever you found it. And I think that that will play a role in many of our podcasts as we come across topic to topic.
Yeah.
And then we also invite viewers, you know, if there's something that you're interested in, you never know, give us a suggestion down in the comments and it might turn into one of the episodes.
And it's important to recognize that if we say something controversial or if we recommend a flight training activity that sounds to you to be risky, raise that objection, okay? Let us deal with it. Okay,
Yeah.
we can either defend what it is that we are recommending or we can't. And I have formed opinions, obviously, very strong ones. If you can persuade me that you have a better answer than I do, not equally good, but better, I'll abandon mine and I'll adopt yours.
Yes.
But what's the criterion? What's the standard of measure? It's safety. In the long run, and this is really important to say, because if I'm going to sit here and shoot my mouth off about flying, what I have to make sure that everybody understands is that you have to plan for a graceful surrender. Okay, safety is at stake. You pull back on the yoke, you pull back on the stick, you've entered into a new universe of risk. And there are a lot of pilots who fly without an awareness of that. Okay, they climb flatter than VY in a single engine airplane. I don't know what they're thinking of. Somewhere along the line, I'm going to talk to you about how to turn around after an engine failure at very low altitudes. 15 years ago, that was very controversial.
Right.
Now there's a kind of generalized acceptance.
It's
not
possible.
the majority.
Yeah. So it's been renamed from the impossible turn to the
turn.
you probably shouldn't do that turn.
Exactly. That's absolutely right. Well, I'm here to tell you that I've done it 3 times for real. And it is not only possible, it is worth understanding because you can't do it if you don't practice. We're going to recommend some activities in the training process that might cause you to raise your eyebrows.
You should be doing the things that are the most risky, the most dangerous that you'll ever face in your entire flying career while you're learning. And because you've done them and you've done them thoroughly and done them well, that entire flying career that you have afterwards, you'll be much safer.
And then that depends upon your imagination, because your perception of danger and safety, because you used the word dangerous, and I would have sort of stepped in and said, well, it's not dangerous as you were doing it because it was prepared.
This
right?
perception, right?
It is a perception that it's dangerous. And it would be dangerous had you not practiced it. I don't want people trying to turn around at low altitude after an engine failure who haven't done what I recommend as a way of practicing.
Absolutely.
That's dangerous.
Some of the things that we talk about are going to require a CFI that is above the average caliber.
I'm sorry to say that that's true.
If you agree with the philosophy, then use your dollars to change the industry. Choose your flight instructor, choose your flight school. Tell the flight instructor that you have or the flight school that you have that you want them to embrace a more flight skill first mentality in flight training. And if they're not, get a glider rating, get a float plane rating, learn aerobatics, right? So take charge, use your dollars, your market-based approach to affect pilot training.
And by far the most affordable of all of those in terms of the immediate benefit would be soaring, because you pay more for the tow than you do for the flight.
Right.
The part that has the engine is still the most expensive.
And I think that soaring has the greatest application to the airlines because airliners are incredible gliders.
Yeah, I know. They got a lot of wing.
They're about 20 to 1. It's actually really hard to get them to come down. We'll have plenty of podcasts that are just the topic at hand, but we're also going to start interviewing people.
Yeah.
And between the two of us, we know a lot of really interesting people.
That's very true.
These are all people that are passionate about aviation and really believe in this stick and rudder flight skill first mentality.
And I just want to establish this as a goal. I cannot tell you really that I ever trained a pilot whom I would say was good. The private pilot graduate is not, in my estimation, a good pilot. Here was the goal. The pilot needs to be good enough to survive while continuing to learn.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two pieces of that are really important. Good enough to survive, that's pretty obvious, okay? And it's not easy to get to that level, but you still aren't a good pilot, and you shouldn't think of yourself as a good pilot. It's often said, however, oh, it's not a license, it's a license to learn and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that some people don't continue learning.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next piece that's important is good enough to survive while continuing to learn. And the continuing to learn part is critically important. And you know whose responsibility that is? It's the instructor's responsibility, or it's the school culture. Okay.
Absolutely.
Instructors have to get that piece of the initial interest in learning to fly sufficiently aflame, roaring away, so that the person says, well, okay, that's pretty cool. What do I learn next?
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now that it's not instruments.
Yeah.
Okay. There are several necessary steps between private pilot certification and the instrument rating. Okay. You need to learn to fly better. You need to learn stick and rudder skills better. And the way to do that is as Ty has recommended, right? It's very possible that an opportunity to go soaring or possibly an opportunity to do aerobatics will offer itself, but they aren't that common, okay? You can, however, get better on your own, but you have to set yourself targets. You have to set yourself challenges. You have to make sure that that landing would have worked in an engine-out situation, okay? You didn't use all 5,000 feet of the runway, okay? It's up to you to continue to improve.
Well, Michael, thank you for sitting down with me today and
Great
filming
pleasure.
this episode 1. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to move on to this first phase where we're going to teach through solo. So we're going to have a lot of videos from my airplanes mostly. So I've got a Piper Cub on floats and a 1934 Waco biplane. And they're not your typical Cessna 172 CFI videos that you would find on YouTube. But I think between your depth of knowledge and your just amazing teaching technique and the visual beauty of vintage airplanes and float planes like I have, it's going to be pretty fun.
I'm looking forward to it.
If you'd like to help us get the message out, please like and subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and share this video podcast on your social media platforms.